You ever have one of those moments where you think, there's no way these people are really that stupid? And then bam, the universe says, hold my beer. That was me last winter watching my HOA board rip out the snow barriers I'd built on my own damn property because apparently they thought a few chunks of timber were uglier than, oh, I don't know, getting buried alive. And you know what? The very first night after they did it, the storm hit and our street vanished, buried under 9 feet of wind-packed snow. I'm talking doors crushed shut, people trapped inside their houses, and a board member who almost froze to death. Guess who dug him out? Yours truly. Let me back up a sec. This isn't the story of some rebel homeowner fighting for his landscaping rights. No, this is about how a single HOA decision nearly turned a cul-de-sac into a graveyard, and how winter itself served the justice they wouldn't hear. I didn't build those barriers to prove a point to look different, or to piss anybody off. I built them because I know what winter can do. I've seen snow act less like a pretty Christmas card, and more like a living thing. A thing that crawls over fences, presses against doors, and can swallow your house whole if the wind and terrain get their way. Maybe that's what the board never got about me. To them, those barriers were some kind of statement. For me, they were memory protection experience hammered into wood and steel. I'd been living on Birch Hollow Drive for 6 years before anybody said a word about them. See, Birch Hollow's got this gentle dip right between two ridgelines. Nothing much to look at in summer, but in winter, it's a wind tunnel. That northeast wind comes roaring down, dumps snow right in the B-shaped corner of our cul-de-sac, and my driveway sits at the worst possible spot. I've seen drifts stack up 6 feet high in hours. First winter I moved in, I'm out there at 2 a.m., headlamp on, digging out my truck while the wind slapped me so hard my face went numb. That's before I put up a single post, long before the HOA even cared. Thing is, most folks don't think about wind tunnels or drift patterns. But I do. The Army drilled that into me when I was stationed up in Alaska. We did cold weather ops at -40, learned how to read snowpack, how avalanches start, how a drift can bury you or your best friend before you even know it's there. Yeah, there's an incident. One I don't talk about much. We were crossing a valley in a storm. My buddy Carter's Humvee went nose first into a drift nobody saw coming. Weight collapsed the snowpack, the whole rig flipped, disappeared under white in seconds. We got some out, not all. Carter didn't make it. After that, snow was never just snow for me again. Years later, when my wife and I moved here, I thought maybe the worst was behind me. First couple years, winter was just snow days and hot cocoa for the neighborhood. Then came the year everything changed, a storm that snapped trees like twigs, cut the power for 2 days. I spent that night awake, listening to the wind and feeling the snow climb up the walls inch by inch. That was the last winter my wife was alive. She was sick, nothing to do with the weather, but in the middle of that storm, she put her hand on mine and whispered, "You always keep us safe, Marcus." I hear her voice every time the first frost comes. So, yeah, when I built those barriers, heavy timber posts anchored in steel, forming low retaining walls to redirect drifts away from driveways and doors, it wasn't vanity. It was instinct, maybe a promise to someone who isn't here anymore. For years, nobody cared. The barriers blended into the fence line, looked like they'd always been there. But last winter, the HOA got a new board and the whispers started. Reviewing exterior compliance, non-uniform elements, then the letters showed up mild, then not so mild, then that classic HOA tone. "We regret to inform you," which always means, "Buckle up, buddy, we're coming for you." The final letter said, "My barriers disrupted community aesthetic harmony." Harmony. As if a snowdrift cares about curb appeal. One frosty November morning, Karen Delaney, the new HOA president, shows up in a red coat, clipboard in hand, like she's about to deliver a death sentence. Doesn't knock, just stands at the edge of my porch. "Mr. Hayes, the board has determined your structures must be removed by the end of the month." Structures? Like I'd built a fortress. I tried to explain these barriers, keep your street safe. Karen looked at me like I'd suggested sacrificing goats. "They're unsightly," she said. "They don't match the neighborhood design guidelines." And then get this, she says, "Snow is temporary. Aesthetics are year-round." Yeah, that happened. I told her straight, I'm not removing them. Her jaw clenched. "The HOA will undertake corrective action at your expense." That's when I realized this wasn't going to be a disagreement. This was a battle. Me versus people who think experience is paranoia. A week later, I get summoned to the monthly board meeting. Mandatory attendance. Final determination. All 5 of them behind a folding table, Karen dead center, chin high. Greg, the treasurer, sweater vest, and all tells me, we're implementing a stricter standard of visual consistency. Consistency doesn't stop a snowdrift, I say. Karen fires back. Safety is the city's responsibility, Mr. Hayes. Aesthetics fall under ours. I had city approval, but she didn't care. Guidelines clearly prohibit structures that disrupt visual harmony. I almost laughed. It was clear the decision was already made. They gave me until November 28th. Or we remove them and you pay. I appealed. Didn't matter. That night I looked through my old storm notes, pressure drops, wind patterns, all those habits I never shook off from Alaska. What I saw chilled me worse than the weather. A storm was coming, the same pattern that buried Carter's vehicle. It wasn't, maybe it was soon. The day before Thanksgiving, I come home from running errands and there's a crew in my yard, jackets, crowbars, saws, tearing out my barriers. Half already gone. I jump out, shout, "What the hell are you doing?" They show me the HOA work order, say it's common area frontage. It isn't. I've got the plat maps. They don't argue, they just pack up. Karen prepaid hired a backup crew for the next day just to make sure the job got finished. I stood there staring at the ruined post. The torn-up ground felt like someone had ripped up a piece of me. Then my phone buzzes invoice from the HOA text from a neighbor. "Marcus, what happened? Karen said you approved the removal, already spinning the story." I text back, "No, they trespassed." Another message, "Karen says you're scaring people again. Smear campaign in real time." I took photos evidence because something told me this was just the beginning. That night, the pressure dropped. Wind shifted, the storm built fast. At midnight, I stepped out onto the porch, anemometer in hand, 28-mile-an-hour gusts screaming down the ridge. No barriers left, nothing to slow the wind. Inside, I pulled out my old Army binder pages, yellowed with years marked with every drift diagram I'd ever drawn. The pattern matched high-pressure ridge, deep Alberta, low moisture, funneled right at Birch Hollow. I emailed the board, pressure graphs, historical photos, everything. Destruction of snow barriers has dramatically increased the probability of emergency access blockage. Next morning, there's a violation notice in my mailbox. Please refrain from sending alarmist emails. Weather hysteria is unnecessary. Birch Hollow HOA. Yeah, you know what I mean. The storm hit that night. The snow didn't fall, it raced. Wind turned our street into a white canyon. Within hours, drifts built across the road, 6, 8, 10 feet high, burying doors, sealing houses. Power blew out. The last thing I saw before the lights went was Karen's front porch, buried, her red coat half frozen, beating at the door, trapped outside. Greg was already under the snow, blue-lipped and barely breathing. I hauled him out, dragged them both inside. Blankets, body heat, Greg lived. But the arrogance was gone, replaced by something like understanding. All night I moved from house to house, digging people out, hauling blankets, shouting over the wind. Old Mrs. Kellerman, 83 cane and all, almost didn't make it. Steve, who'd laughed at my alarmism, showed up at my door half frozen, terrified. Basement's buried. Garage doors stuck. I gave him a hot water bottle, told him to stay put. By morning, the drift wall down the center of Birch Hollow stood higher than the basketball hoop. Emergency crews couldn't get in. No plow was coming, maybe not that day, maybe not the next. Karen poured me coffee with shaking hands. "We thought we were protecting property values," Greg said. "Turns out we almost killed everyone for a prettier curb." I didn't have a comeback. When the city inspectors finally arrived, snowshoes, radios, the works, the drift was 14 feet high. They took one look at the torn-out barrier posts, shook their heads. "Who authorized removal?" the inspector asked. Karen, Greg, and Lydia stood silent. The inspector announced, "If these barriers had remained, this drift never would have happened. Removing certified safety infrastructure in winter is a direct violation of city code. Possible criminal negligence." Neighbors turned on the board in seconds. Mrs. Watkins' voice shaking. My husband almost froze because we couldn't open our door. Mrs. Kellerman Kane pointed like a spear. "If Marcus hadn't dug me out, I would have died." Even Steve stepped forward, eyes red. I laughed at his warnings. I was an idiot. "I'm sorry, Marcus." It was over for the board. The city asked me to become Birch Hollow's official winter safety liaison. I said yes because who else was going to do it? We rebuilt the barriers, taller, stronger, Every neighbor out there, swinging hammers, mixing concrete, taking orders from Mrs. Kellerman in her scooter. Karen and Greg resigned, handed me a note. You kept us alive. You gave us a second chance. We'll never waste it again. We finished by sunset. The new barriers stood proud and unbreakable this time, not just mine. The city grandfathered them in permanent. No HOA can ever touch them again. The street became a celebration. Music, fire pit, laughter, kids running between the posts, adults trading stories, Steve sheepishly handing me a bottle of whiskey, promising next time. Whatever you say goes, no questions, no emojis. As dusk settled, Karen and Greg came over. Greg, pale but alive, handed me a wooden plaque to Marcus Hayes, who taught us the most beautiful thing a neighborhood can have isn't perfect lawns, but perfect neighbors. Birch Hollow, forever grateful. Mrs. Kellerman pressed a tin of shortbread into my hands. For the nights when the wind still talks to you. Remember, you're not alone anymore. The fire burned low, stars came out, and Daniel from the city told me they're naming the new barriers after you, Hayes Drift Defense Line. County code by spring. I just laughed. Tell them to keep it standing. Karen raised her mug voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. To Marcus Hayes, who kept a promise to people who didn't even know they needed keeping. The whole neighborhood echoed to Marcus. For the first time in years, the cold felt like protection, not punishment. We'd all changed. Birch Hollow slept that night under a new kind of blanket, not just snow, but the knowledge that when the next storm comes, and it will, we'll meet it together. Not with clipboards and rules, but with shovels, respect, and the quiet certainty that some lessons you only have to learn once. Because once you've been buried by your own ignorance, you never forget how sweet it is just to breathe. So what do you think? Did justice find its way through a blizzard, or did we just get lucky? Leave a comment, share your story. Tell me what you think about second chances and what really keeps a neighborhood safe.